So I'll just sort of get us started with a bit of the intro. This is our TLP Talks, Truth, Liberation, Peace Talks. This is our third one, and the inspiration has come from what's happening right now in the world, but also out of a frustration of things like this that have been happening in our world that tend to go maybe not as noticed as it needs to be in our minds and our hearts. I felt a particular impact from this current, whether you wanted to call it a conflict or a war or atrocity that's happening in the Middle East. And so this is part of my inspiration, but I also want to kind of pull the lens back in some different ways rather than becoming polarized with the way we may discuss this, that we actually reference it to some of our own maybe more personal viewpoints. I'll just say Amy and I talked briefly about this yesterday regarding kind of what is, the creative mind in a situation like this versus the strategic mind or the political mind. What comes into the conversation if we bring in some other viewpoints? How do we take care of ourselves in the midst of something like this? How do we be agents for expressing our message or our view when it's very confusing and conflicted and controversial? So a lot of things here that got inspired of why I wanted to start these talks, and I appreciate that you're all here. The Steve Bros and Vatasha have been involved in one other talk. Steve Bros was the second one, Vatasha the first one. But Vatasha, you've been with me for all of these Empower Hours, and Steve too has been in lots of the Empower Hours. So these are kind of rolling out in that same way. So let's take a moment to start with some arrival in a mindful way. If you choose, you can lower the eyes or even close the eyes. Take note of what part of the body is connecting to the ground. If there's any adjusting that you might do so you feel more comfortable from the ground up. So take a few moments. You might notice the body adjust, shift. And then it might feel that there's more availability to observe the breath, going from the more gross, tangible part of ourself, this physical body, to then a more subtle aspect of ourself, the breath. Acknowledge the value of each inhale, creating an uplifted feeling, maybe even lengthening the spine just a little bit. Every exhale that reminds us to soften, not to strain, to feel ourselves connecting to the ground. I'd like to offer that this inhale, exhale breath has some of the components of being a dualistic element, one breath, but it has two parts. And notice how the mind typically isn't going to judge that the inhale is better than the exhale. You're able to be with both, seeing them as useful, valuable for some part of our system. The inhale breath for our system to receive nourishment, the exhale breath that actually nourishes other plant life, species. Come into this moment. Let's take another few moments in silence. Om. Observe the next inhale breath, the next exhale breath. Again, inhale, maybe take a deeper breath. Exhale. If your eyes have been closed, you can gently start to open them, looking low, and then start to arrive back into this space. Lars, welcome.
Thanks, Mark.
Good to see you.
You too.
On the road.
On the road. Yeah, I tried to get you at the pool, but I couldn't get in. So I tried again and I got in. Great
Oh,
to
good.
see you, hear you. Yeah.
I might have had my eyes closed while we were getting started. But I peeked right before we did our moment of silence. So, all right. Well, we have Vatasha who might go in and out because I know she's with her kids. You see my brother, maybe. I don't know if on the phone it's as easy to see folks. But you can see next to me is my good friend Amy, who I've known since childhood. Lars has been involved in these talks as well, and involved in the studio. So this is our little community. Well, a light topic for the evening to gently have us check in with where we are. And as I was sharing earlier, you know, in some ways, the primary focus of these are those three words, you know, truth, liberation, peace. These are three words that are prominent in yogic practice, Buddhist practice in particular, and that's definitely, of course, yoga being my reference point. This is already like a process of self-study and ongoing contemplation. One of the things that I proposed when I created the talk was, is it possible to talk about peace if we haven't clearly understood the context of what's going on? Sometimes peace can appear like it's happening, but it's only because certain people are being made to be quiet or just completely taken out of the conversation. So is that really peace? So what I felt inspired to look at was, okay, what's actually true? What can we actually name as the truth? Yoga speaks about, and we talked about this in yesterday's Empower Hour, the grateful for the light of truth. When we talk about the truth in yoga, it's that which is the changeless. That sort of, it boils down to that's the bare minimum, or not the bare minimum, the prime element of truth is what can everything be, where can you get all the way down to the root of what is true? And that is something that is changeless. What is changeless? That there's a part of us that never was born and never dies. There's an aspect of us that's connected to an absolute truth. And that's kind of it. Everything else is changes. And so therefore it's not actually true. Who we are, where we were when we were 10 years old, 20 years old, 40 years old, beyond, those fluctuate. So if whatever's going to fluctuate is actually not going to be considered true, but part of the illusion of existence. So that's a tough one, because then we're going to acknowledge, like, is this all just an illusion? And so how do I function in a world of illusion? But just sort of showing some of the, and this is deeply discussed in yoga and Buddhism. It's not that it is left there just hanging. And then the other thing, liberation, you know, can we really be liberated? And this has been shared in so many movements, from the civil rights movements to women's movements, LGBTQ movement. You know, can one be free until all are free? So this whole concept of, same thing with the bodhisattva vow. Like there's a vow, like I will hold off from fully becoming an enlightened being until I can help all become enlightened beings. And that's in Buddhism, the bodhisattva vow. Peace then is an ultimate concept of understanding. And as the Steve Bros, you talked about this last week, peace is already within us. So all of these concepts, I think, are actually already within us. The truth is within us. That being free, we already are free. There's just this misunderstanding. And in that misunderstanding, terrible things can happen. Our egos get in the way, our attachments get in the way, our aversions get in the way. So part of the premise here is how much of this can we impact through a shift in perspective and sending out a vibration of truth, liberation, peace from our own practice? How might we be unconsciously sending out ripples that are perpetuating all of the things being the way they are? And what can each of us do that can actually potentially make, simply put, this world a better place? So I'm excited by who's here tonight. We have some different approaches and different experiences and backgrounds of what we do in the world, or maybe the way we see the world. So I'm going to leave it there and just see if anyone has any immediate thoughts from that initial offering.
I like how you last week you stated that the truth was kind of your basis. That was kind of your thing that you're kind of trying out, seeing what the truth is in different things. Yeah, and that's one of the primary in yoga and Buddhism. The truth is pretty much the primary liberator. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll offer something. Just in terms of, I think what I struggle with right now is that there are so many apparent truths to be held at the same time, and how to reconcile those with the different communities of people that I love that are experiencing, their own truths, and maybe without digging down on what's, I don't know, is it time to dig down on really what's true there, or is there a different container, a different word? I don't know, but that's where my struggle is right now.
I think you're not alone. I think this is the I think conflict in a way, is like my truth versus your truth. And if they're never going to find common space,
Right.
then whose truth is true? And we talked yesterday, Tasha, we were going on about this, that, it's absolutely the case. One person's truth may not be the other person's truth. Your truth 10 minutes ago might not be your truth right now.
Right.
So that is going to continually change and will always be different across personalities to some extent. To exacerbate that, we have social media, we have misinformation, we have a lot of other folks that are intentionally trying to manipulate the truth. And I think we just have different versions of how we're looking at something. I always love to reference the integral yoga yantra, because it helps me have a visual understanding of why religions get in conflict. So the yantra, it's actually right there. Amy's not as familiar with it on the wall. It's a symbol that has all the major religions around this circle. And in the center is a dot, which is the Atman, sort of the ultimate consciousness. And if you look at that circle, like all the different religions are looking in at that dot. But like if I take, I'll take this as my example here. Or I'll do it this way even. So if you and I are looking at this, Amy's going to see the side that says Samsung on it. And I see the side that's blank. And so Amy's going to say, this is Samsung. And I'm going to say, no, it has no name. This is no name. Like, no, Samsung. I'm like, no name. And we'll end up beating each other up because we're looking at the same thing, but from our own different place. And then there'll be people who will look at it from above and all they see is this little sliver. They're going to think it's a line. And we're like, no, it's a square or a rectangle. So this is what ends up happening is we might all be looking at something similar. I'm not saying that's what's happening right now. So this is just a quick aside. We might be looking at something similar, but calling it different things. In that reference, it's almost more like all of the different names for God, Buddha, Allah. People misunderstand that actually if you synthesize this or distill it, the intention of it is I think the intention is it's the same. And in many ways, that's where the light, is maybe a most common reference of common understanding. Now, what happens if it is all the different versions of a story? And is it the same thing we're looking at, but we have different versions of the story? That's where it gets a lot more complicated.
Well, is it really though? Because it kind of seems like we're talking about the elephant parable, where we're all just looking at one leg, and maybe we're just looking at this, but we're all looking at the same elephant. It seems like that's what you're referencing here. And it's like just having the awareness that there are different perspectives. It kind of blends into the whole truth of one thing. If you can respect and understand that my truth is my truth, allow me to have my own truth, and I can then allow you to have your own truth, then we can see that we're just holding a different elephant's leg.
I have to process that a little bit with exactly the context of what's going on.
I get it.
Go ahead.
So by allowing each person to have their truth, there's no conflict. Ideally, both people who are allowing each other to have their truth get that they're looking at the same elephant. But even if they're not, even if they don't really get that, but they kind of hope for that, there's no conflict. And then with no conflict, peace is possible.
I had read this book, and I wish I could remember the title of it. I read it like 15 years ago, easy. And it was World War II, and there's a Jewish girl. She's trying to get out of Germany. She's on this boat. The boat gets sent back. She's like, you're just rooting for her to survive, get on this boat and get to basically what will be Israel. And then meanwhile, there's a Palestinian girl, and you're following her story of being moved into a camp and everything else. And eventually, and all you want is like the one thing they need to survive. At one point, the Palestinian girl leaves the camp, and she and her partner like get a goat, and then thank God they have a goat, and now they're going to be able to eat because they've got this goat. And then you find out that the guy got the goat by stealing it, and when he was stealing the goat, the Jewish girl's husband got killed. So like you have this one perspective where you're like, finally this thing happened that you're going to survive, and then you turn the page and you see the other side of the story, and it's like as a book, like no stories like being told from that perspective has kind of hit me the same way. I need to remember what the name of that book was, because it was a long time ago I read it.
That's a powerful story to reference that. That's part of what I guess I get stuck with or stuck on, is if we look at somebody telling their version of what's happening, their truth, how did they get to that conclusion? Especially if it's in opposition of somebody else's version of a story. And at what point in the story are you telling what happened? Sort of like, are you going to stick with the part where they got the goat, so they're going to be like, this is a joyful moment? Or do we go back to what's part of the story is true then? And maybe it's just true in the moment that it's, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one.
Let me throw this one out there.
Good.
In Buddhism, a lot of problems arise when I have to have my truth. But a lot of problems go away when I realize it's just the truth. The truth that we all have. So ego can block truth finding, because ego requires ego requires me, ego requires I. But without ego, it's not my truth, it's the truth that we're all suffering. We all have emotions that need to be dealt with. So I do that exercise. I try to do it multiple times a week, multiple times a day. When I go, oh, mine, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. And I go, this pain is mine. And I'm like, no, it's the pain that we all inevitably experience.
Yeah, I think the conversation gets muddled when we're talking about opinions and morals and ethics, when we assign all those things to truth instead of allowing truth to exist in itself. Whenever instead we're saying it has to be defined in this way, it has to be just, it has to be correct. Once you let go of all of those things and just allow it to be the one thing that it is, it kind of brings about a bit of more of a freedom to just accept it the way that it is.
I just have, your kids' hands look like they're your hands. But I'm like,
but not really.
They're not really here.
It does.
That was
That's
so good. That
amazing.
was wild.
That's one of the most amazing things I've seen all year.
And then you brush your hair.
I know. Then another hand comes in. I'm like, what? Because you're talking, that other hand, the hand was sort of doing some. Sorry, not to take away from what you said, Tasha. I just had to note that.
No, it's fine. This is my whole life. Tiny hands wandering.
Oh, Lars, I saw you unmuted.
Could you just restate your original question, Mark?
Oh, wow.
And if not, that's totally cool. Yeah.
Like original from the very start, or?
Yeah, the one that yeah.
I'm not sure. I think I had so many all at once, but I think it was essentially, it's like what I feel like it was coming off of where Amy started to go, which is, how do we know what is true? Or is truth the first step towards being able to get to peace? Similar topic we've been
yeah. Well, I'm gonna be part.
Oh, you're cutting out.
I could speak to it, but I think I'll wait until I've got signal.
Okay. My brother, I think he just went off screen for a moment. Yeah, I want to stick with this for a little bit, where because I feel like I haven't fully unwound this component, because I'm struggling with this also, where, because of social media and news and access to all kinds of information, I'm seeing things where I'm like hearing what sounds like some side of the story that is true, and then I'm hearing another side of the story that is true for some voices out there. And I know where I stand, and so I know when I hear the voices that I don't feel hold what I recognize as truth, then my eyes and my heart sees kind of the scary wizard that's in front of, the little man standing behind it, trying to, make everything go. And it sounds like, as it is in that story of the Wizard of Oz or the Wiz, the more anxious or worried that the actual man gets, he makes his wizard persona more fierce. And so on some level, there's a part of my mind that reduces the situation like that. I see the story to me that has been covered up by the big wizard. So it's hard to no matter how convincing, how much smoke gets blown from the ears of the wizard and how much fire comes out of the mouth of the wizard and how loud the voice gets, I feel like I know what's behind the curtain. So I'll just use it in that way, that kind of metaphor. But I know that my close friends will have maybe the exact other version of that same story. So in those kind of situations, in this kind of situation, I don't feel that I have in this moment anyway, the power to try to change their mind. But all I can do is continue to sit with my experience of this and to continue to sense what feels true for me, because ultimately that's who I have to stand up for. And honestly, the only way that I've been able to get here is from sitting with it, in quiet spaces, but also in researching. And I've tried to disengage from the moment to moment stuff, because that is always going to it's going to trigger emotions. And when you're in a state of triggered emotions, it's going to be hard to really get to the point of the truth. You're going to stay in the very colored, distorted messaging, of the moment. So I've decided to pull more away from that and to kind of dive into, how did we get here? Let me learn, history. Even that's complicated, because as I do that, I see all the different versions of history that's documented. This is this history. No, that's actually not true. This is the history. No, it's not. This is it. So then I'm like, whew. Again, I have to listen to my own sensibility. And there's things that I recognize from my history and my past that gives me clues of where I bring in my sense of what I think is true. How does that land
I
for
think
you?
that's a very impactful consideration, that as much as the state of things are right now, that's not where you live, that's not where you're from. And at some point you have the audacity to think that, oh, what I can do anything that's impactful to a whole people, a whole country, that in all reality I can never do anything to change, you know? So I think the best we can always do is try to learn more of their history. And if any way that their history becomes your history, then it's almost like you chase after it harder to like seek a level of understanding. So I've noticed that I go way more in depth when it relates to me. And I kind of, it's just the curiosity of it sometimes. It's like, how can you rewrite a whole history that exists like it never happened at all? Like, it always takes a breath. to just come to the realization that sometimes we're just all being manipulated. We're all having like strings pulled left to the right to make us feel and to make us think a certain type of way that's far from the truth of reality.
Deep breath.
I think I can speak now without interference.
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. So I once went to a shrink who was a psychiatrist who was Venezuelan and gay and an elder, and I was trying to get off of like a number of medications and just like habit patterns that felt impossible to get off. And one of the things he said really stuck with me because I'm not really a big fan of psychiatry, but I asked him to help me without medication. And so he said, okay, so dig this. There are no such things as little white lies. There are only big, giant, ginormous lies. And if you self-deceive, then you really can't get better with the essence of this point. And the other thing that's coming to mind, and I do want to say also that I think just having this conversation and each of your willingnesses to be here and talking about this really challenging, how to find truth, liberation, and peace, it's a really courageous act. So I want to give us each gratitude, props for doing so. This morning there was either an op-ed or a main story on the cover of the Times, and it was by an Israeli activist for peace, and they said that the only thing that people on both sides of the border can agree on is that their neighbors want to kill them. And where I go from that is, the truth of our nervous system is something we generally hold in common. I mean, unless you have some kind of damage. So we all know how it is to feel safe, calm, and connected through singing and touching and being around people you love. And we all know what it is to feel variously terrified or rageful or frozen or fawning, accommodating, or falling apart. And so those things are true. Like, if I knew my neighbors wanted to kill me for sure, I would probably go into one of those reactions, and then my analytical mind can't do a whole lot for me. So I think one of the big pieces in the now is that the internet, our social networks, the algorithms and such, they favor analytical mind, and so we can get into these real spiraling rabbit holes of what's true and what's not true. And at the same time, we all each have a innate, brilliant intuition when we speak and share and learn from the heart. The stuff that comes up in yoga that you bring so beautifully, the connection and safety and care and equanimity and all that. So I think that the way that we are organized and dancing with the technology keeps us kind of more in the analytical mind, which paradoxically makes everything kind of more tangled up and maybe worse. And that's not, I think the people we admire the most, like the Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubmans and Gandhi, or these spiritual leaders who rise above by showing people which they already know, which is that being loving and caring and graceful and compassionate, these things heal. and reducing into an other, and insisting on our separateness through words or deeds is a little white lie that a lot of us, populist dictators and politicians and stuff will always make an other and scapegoat, and I'll always scapegoat them as another, the authoritarians, especially. But that's a either it's a big blatant lie or a little white lie or whatever. But I think that what we each know is what our hearts know, and our hearts, don't lie. Our hearts have that capacity and potential and grace to show us very clearly what's true, what feels safe, what feels connected, what feels loving and good.
Wow, thank you, Lars.
Yeah, it felt good to say, because I mean, it's been a long, hard road for me, and a lot of it has been about justifying my own, continued behavior so I can soothe my own suffering. I'm what the shrinks would call a dual diagnosis case, like severe depression, and then throwing a whole lot of bad medicine at it to try and make it better. And I feel like I've come out the other end of the tunnel, and I feel really good to say that. It's major. And I have so much compassion for people who suffer like this, who don't have the privilege and the resources that I've been able to find. I'll shut up.
Well, it's nice to hear you have some really clear points, and I also just will say, it's sort of, we talked about yesterday in our Empower Hour talk, that everyone is going to have their own journey on this path, even around truth, liberation, peace, like what it means for each of us. And I think that's the hard thing, is one thing won't work for the next person. So we can't try to say, I know the answer, I've got the one answer, and I'm going to tell everybody, here's the one answer. And meanwhile, that means we don't take into account everybody's story. Now, is everybody's story really who they are? Or but it's a story that they know until they're open to there being a different story. Sometimes that's what I feel like we're all living off of, are the stories that we've been handed. And I know I feel that way with some of my education. For example, as we're in Thanksgiving week, we know probably for most of us the stories that we were taught about Thanksgiving. And it sounded very happy. It sounded like this very, Amy and I went to the same school where we heard some of these same stories, but I didn't have any thought of it being a different story.
Right.
It was because it wasn't convenient to tell us differently. They wanted to us, we wanted to feel like proud Americans, and we're the right ones, we're the superpower, there's all this to help support this version of a story that I know I see very differently now. I know a lot of people who see this story very differently now, so that we're not trying to create conflict by erasing one version. I think I was recognizing it's interesting, how choices are made, but how many years ago was that, that we've come to this place where we can finally recognize Indigenous people of the Americas? 400 years ago with bringing people over from Africa to enslave them. And yesterday we were talking about the normalizing of lynching that happened in the late 1800s, 1900s. And at some point that seemed, okay and normal, that we now can recognize is completely inhumane. And we would, most people would now say that never could happen again. But it happened because somebody followed a story, somebody followed somebody else's story that was convincing enough, that became the truth, for that moment. So that's where I get stuck, because it's like that could be what someone's saying is the truth to try to promote that path. But then what about the other truth where, no, that's not right. This is treating people kindly, treating people with love, recognizing that we are all probably suffering from some form of trauma. And so therefore we're shut down in many ways, like you were talking, Lars. And in other ways, we're also squashing that we have this amazing potential that we actually no longer have access to because we've been, made to think it's not possible. I don't know what it's like to grow up in a country where all you know is that war is imminent at any moment. So like Tasha was saying, like, can we even really speak to the situation? I do think though, Tasha, we all can make an impact. I think when voices can be expressed that feel a certain way, we can make an impact. One person can make impact. I think maybe one person can't do everything, but collectively there's power.
I hate the whole collectively thing though. Once we all decide that we're right and we all decide that we're correct, then there's this weird thing that happens that everything becomes absolute. And then when everything becomes absolute, then people try very hard to defend it and then nothing else can come in. It gets ridiculous. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm right. Okay, be right. I know the truth. Okay, know the truth. But there's also other truths. There's also the whole wide world. It can't just be you. So then when we all come together, individualism gets fuddled. Fuddled. Is that the word, fuddled? I think I like that word just for the sake of the word fuddled. That's what it feels like. It's like now we're no longer on the same objective. So I appreciate individuals starting to think for themselves more than a collective understanding the truth.
What do you think, the Steve Bros? I see you thinking away.
I don't know. I mean, if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, there's two truths. There's absolute truth, which is like what you talked about, the soul, the immortal soul in all of us. That's an absolute truth in yoga and Buddhism. And then in yoga and Buddhism, everything else is, well, not everything else, but most of the everyday things that we need to understand are relative truths. So I think it depends on where you want to be. Do you want to be in absolute truth, the spiritual absolute truth? Or do you want to page through all these relative truths? So there's like almost an infinite number of relative truths. So if you're trying to go with everyday conversations about things in the news, it will take a while. Like if you had a project and you were able to record every single person's opinion around the world, it would take a while.
But then what do they say? They always say never walk around with your cup full of water, right? Always be open, always be able to allow more information in. So if you just walk around with your whole cup full of your absolute truths and you leave nothing available for things that are relative to the situation, then you don't have any more room left to grow.
I'd like to make
I don't know if we're connecting though. In spirituality, an absolute truth is not really connected to everyday life. And then relative truths are just regular conversations that may involve the news, various topics, etc. You just go on forever paging through all the relative truth. But I mean, if you did like an honest statistical analysis, say you recorded 7 billion or 8 billion relative truths, and then you did a statistical analysis, you might find like there's like
Common themes.
yeah, common themes. Yeah.
And I think just to make that distinction clear again, because when Steve says the absolute truth, it's not, I think we can use like, I'm absolutely telling you the truth. Like that's a different absolute. It's still a relative. So somebody can hold absolute truth and relative truths because you're living in the world. So I hold the absolute truth as being an absolute truth, and I have my little relative truths that fluctuate. So it's like that. It's not an either or, but there are some who, without any connection to this idea of ultimate consciousness, if there's no reference point to that, then your existence is simply based on all the changing truths. So you will fluctuate because truth is going to fluctuate.
But aliens.
Is it that time to bring in aliens? Oh, I think so. Thank you, Vatasha. Lars, Vatasha.
Yeah, they're in the AI. They're
All I
definitely
know
saying
is that this is the best segue ever, and I'm holding on to it for every meeting for the rest of my life.
But what about the aliens?
But not even that.
No, just
but aliens.
Yeah.
Just the two words.
Because aliens didn't exist, right? So
Mhm.
much of our civilization is based on the truth that aliens do not exist, that we're completely here alone.
Oh.
Now you have to bring into question all of your spiritualities. Were they really talking to the sun? Why were they really worshiping the sun? Is there one God? Are there multiple gods? Was Zeus real? Like now you have to shatter your whole different belief system because a new truth came to light. So all I'm saying is that forget absolute truths, forget the things you know to be true, forget all the evidence that stacks up to what reality is supposedly composed of, because, you know, aliens.
Tasha, I like something you said early on about like, let me hold my truth, you hold your truth, something to paraphrase you there. But then we started talking about stories, and I was like, if we could just all be, so often when someone's truth is hard for me to take, like I can feel the wall of not wanting to, like, because I don't respect where their truth is maybe coming from. But if we get past the emotional response of that, if I can have more curiosity onto their story, of their story of how they got to that place, that doesn't mean I have to respect the place they're in, but the story that got them there, like, without just how to not have that wall as my response is something I would like. So between your comment and the story comment, I was like, oh, okay, I think I got a new tool. Deep breath, more stories. Yeah,
That's beautiful. I think what it sounds like you're mentioning is like that initial defensive response might come out, or this knee-jerk response, because when confronted with difference, we either have to hold tightly to what we know is true, or we can, like Vatasha's talking about this glass half full, we can be a little more open to this idea, like, let me understand a little bit more. Because if I'm walking around, that's an interesting metaphor. If I'm walking around with my glass half full all the time, when I'm spilling my full glass and it just keeps getting full, and I'm spilling it on you, and there's not a whole lot.
there's no room.
There's no room for community. There's no room for something to change. But if we do, so what is it that we do that can pour out half that glass every time? And that comes into practice, something that helps us, literally, meditation, like we're pouring out some of the clutter, dropping off the garbage, recycling, composting, stuff in the brain, and channeling it into creative art. There, I finally got around to that. We're talking about, but have some other realm that's not in this binary system where we feel like we have to call it right or wrong, which is sort of let it be released. We're in that point of final thoughts. Anybody having any from this current splattering of conversation points?
I don't need to be right or for things to be true or to think a certain way. I do value trauma-informed approaches, trauma-informed perspectives, and I think with the amount of information we have available now, that would be a potential positive outcome, that there'd be more space to learn from. Well, positive outcome of what? I mean, it would be a good thing if we all learn more about what trauma is and how it impacts each of us.
100%. How'd we get here? Steve, Vatasha, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think throughout this conversation tonight, I've been like, oh, are we coming from the every person's viewpoint, or are we coming from a yogic viewpoint, or are we coming from a Buddhist viewpoint? So yeah, I just kind of feel like a little unclear about,
Maybe that's the best place to be in
yeah,
because then your glass is half empty,
yeah.
half full.
But I will say one thing. I mean, for the people in the various conflicts around the world who are on the ground and they're on the other side of the fence, I think there's a lot of emotion for them that we don't get to experience sitting here in the United States. So I think there's a lot of emotion for these people in the conflicts to. I think they need to be given space to let their stories unwind and kind of start processing all those emotions that we don't understand. And then maybe by hearing those things, we could understand their plight better.
I like that. It sort of reminds me of what you just said at the end, which was to, rather than react, can we take some time to consider knowing more of the context, and then that opens our heart versus creating more walls and blocks. So I think that, to me, that's at the heart of what we were getting at tonight, and recognizing people see things from different viewpoints, but that if we can take a moment to see what's on the other side, that there's a chance we might have a level of empathy and compassion that otherwise might not be accessible. So, well, this is our time. So thank you all so much for joining in this evening. So again, our weekly TLP Talks. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see some of you there, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Good to see you, Lars, Tasha, Amy, in the morning.